It is the 8th of November 2022, and in this Skidmark I'm going to talk about something that will most probably bring me another label. I've got the label as being a Putin agent, and after this one they'll call me most probably a China agent, but I don't care. The fact of the matter is we have to consider for a moment the same bullshit that MSM has been feeding us for years about Russia. They're doing exactly the same about China. And I'm going to make more China skidmarks, that's for sure, because it's a big topic and China is going to play a major role in our future. You can't get away from that. We're part of BRICS, and that's what it is. Now, last week, the Minister of Finance dropped the bomb that they are cancelling the BEE requirements when it comes to procurement from government departments, municipalities, and SEOs. And there was a lot of stories about it on the social media, and obviously there were a lot of people that were very happy about it, and there were people that were upset about it. The reality is, years of BEE has hollowed out the South African economy to such an extent that those companies and entities that qualify under the BEE rules are no longer able to supply and deliver, because BEE and the associated corruption has basically castrated those operations. Just look at what happened to the Medupi and Kusile debacle. 15, 16 years late on delivery, major technical flaws that now have to be repaired and fixed, and massive corruption. The project is 6 times over budget and it's not finished yet. That is a good indicator. The same issues were shown on the Gautrain project, where South African operators were not allowed to participate in there because of the BEE shit, and in the end we all know the issues that was involved in that project. I mean, that tunneling part of it was ridiculous. They ran into really deep technical issues. They brought tunneling experts from Singapore and from Malaysia to come and finish the project. And here comes the kicker. The guys that were brought in from those eastern countries were South Africans. South Africans that moved out of the country and were driven out of the country. And it was South Africans that came back and had to sort that issues out with the tunneling. That is, then there's the other story. If you look at the Richards Bay coal line from Woodbank to Richards Bay, that line was built in 18 months. 18 months from Woodbank to Richards Bay. World class. And when the coalfields in Alice Ross, when they started exploration there, Zuma said they must build a line from there to Woodbank so that it can connect up with Richards Bay. That was 10 or 12 years ago. Not 1 meter of that line has been built yet. Instead, our roads are demolished by truck trains going down to Maputo, truck trains going down to Richards Bay, all rushing down to the harbours to get our coal out, because the Richards Bay coal line has been so mismanaged and neglected that it is barely functioning. That is what happened to South Africa with BEE. Don't give it any other name. That is what it is. Because there's a core of black people in this country that are of the opinion that people in these big companies and operations were only there in the executive positions because of their skin color. They don't pay any attention to the relevance of qualifications, and experience and skills. But all of that shit is now coming to the surface and everything is falling apart. Everything is falling apart. SAA is gone. South African Railway is gone. Our steel industry, gone. And on the counter side of it, the Chinese is currently building a smelter in Zimbabwe, a massive thing, because they say they want to stop the export of all Zimbabwean ore. Everything must be first processed and then exported. That's what the Chinese is doing in Zimbabwe. Here in South Africa, our South African black government, under its supervision, ISCOR and all the associated steel operators were basically destroyed. The last one to bite the dust is the one in Saldanha. The Saldanha smelter was set up specifically to process the iron ore from Sishen and then export the processed steel. Now they're back to exporting the ore. And that is what this government has done to this country. And then you look at the flip side and associated side, millions of jobs gone down the drain. But in any case, so the euphoria of the BEE requirements being dropped when it comes to procurement was very quickly drowned out yesterday by rumors that Chinese companies has apparently got massive infrastructure projects, contracts, and I'm going to assume it is all, most of it, is in connection with railway lines. Now, if you look, I'm going to first play you a little video clip that will show you how the Chinese work when they build these lines. And you look at that, and then you look at these images. Look at this line being built in China. And look at that elevation. And here's an image, look at this image, this is a station on that one line. Look at that station that's being built there. And then you've got this bridge. This is the world's longest road and rail bridge. The longest road and rail bridge in the world. And then look at this railway line going through that desert, all elevated. The reason for the elevation is for foundation purposes. Here's another image of a fast-speed rail line. Look at that, disappear in the distance. Here is another one of the railway stations. Here is that line, here's a major line being under construction. See how many lines are there? Look at that. The Chinese has been building 5,000 kilometers of high-speed rail lines per year for the past few years. It is unbelievable. And we don't hear about that. But they are connecting all their neighboring countries with that Belt and Road project of the Chinese. And the sad part of that is that in many of those countries through which these lines are running, the CIA is financing terrorist operators there to sabotage the construction work. What the fuck is that? But that's what they do. Look at this. Imagine this going through the winelands. Why do they elevate it? Because they don't want to interfere too much with the agriculture. That's how they work. Look at this line. Imagine lines like this running from Gauteng down to Cape Town. Imagine it. The line on the right is in operation, the line on the left they're busy with construction. Look at this. From horizon to horizon, through the rural China. Can you imagine the difference it's making to those rural people's lives to be connected like that? And then we look at what the West does. This is what China does. Let's look at what the West is doing. This is what they do in the Middle East. This, destroy and destruct. This is what they do in Yemen, a poor country, bombed into oblivion. Millions of people dead. Millions of people dying, children dying. For 8 years they've been cut off from medicine and food. This is what the West does. And here's another one from the Middle East. Look at that. destruction. Imagine the financial losses for those countries with this. Here you see the buildings down, but what about the infrastructure? The power lines, the gas lines, the water lines, the sewage lines, all of that fucked up. By who? By the West. And then you get Borrell being very upset when he visited Africa. He was barely received by any of the leaders. And then when Lavrov visited Africa, the dignitaries were standing in queues to shake his hand. And Borrell was very upset about that. Why? The Chinese, when they invest in these countries, yes, they are there for raw materials, but they invest in the infrastructure. Look at this road system they're building in East Africa. Look at this economical housing they built in Angola. Yeah, and there is issues about that housing complex there currently, and most of those issues can be traced back to government incompetence and corruption, not the Chinese building. Look at this rail line in Eastern Africa. Can you imagine what it means to those rural people to be connected to the bigger cities and so, with an efficient, safe transport mode? And then we come to the harbors. Yes, there are, the MSM will tell you that the Chinese take control of the harbors. But the fact of the matter is China has built 20 harbors in Africa over the past 10 years. And what the MSM don't tell you is, yes, the Chinese take control of that harbor. But that control means that there is a rate calculations done on the usage of that harbor. And that rate calculations is credited to the original capital loan that China provided to build the harbor. And once that loan is sorted out, ownership of the harbor reverts back to the country. And from then on, it's just a commercial operation. So, China invests, then it drives that investment and manage it, because they build these harbors so that they can import and export from those countries. But what does the West do? No, they give a lot of money to the corrupt government, money that never reaches the people, and on the same time they finance all sorts of resistance operators to create chaos, and in that chaos they steal the raw materials. That's what they're doing currently. They're currently busy with that in Syria, doing exactly that, stealing 80% of Syria's oil production. The West is at the end of its reign of terror, that's for sure. Blinken came to South Africa and he tried to get the South African government to turn against Russia, and our Minister Pandor sent him packing, and then the American representative to the UN visited Northern Africa and Eastern Africa and threatened those people with sanctions, those countries with sanctions if they trade with Russia. Those countries send her packing, the Southern African states send Blinken packing. And you wonder why the Americans and the West is no longer welcome in Africa? Because of abuse. But let's get back to our little situation here in South Africa. Here's another image of a rail line being built in Africa by the Chinese. So, if Chinese firms picked up the contracts for rail lines in South Africa, we must be glad, because first of all, they actually built the lines and they delivered them. Secondly, they've got zero tolerance for unions. They've got zero tolerance for the construction mafia. They've got zero tolerance for corrupt government officials. And it is a known fact, the Chinese don't have problems with white people. They work with white people wherever they get involved with them. So if you are a white guy with your own enterprise that is in construction and so, instead of sitting there and crying about the fact that the Chinese company got the contract, connect with them, contact them, and start talking to them because they bring basically all their labor in from China. So if you can assist in the project, they will most probably, I'm quite sure, they will use your services, because that is what they do in all the countries where they do these infrastructure projects. But I listened to a video one night where a Chinese guy, it was in Kenya, and he was sitting and he was talking to a black guy, and he said to him, you know what, we don't understand you Africans. We don't understand your mentality. When the colonial masters left your country, you were left with infrastructure and buildings, everything working and functioning. And what did you do? Instead of looking after it and maintaining it and building on it, you destroyed it. You are destroyers. And for me, as a Chinese man, we believe in building. I cannot understand your mentality. I was absolutely stunned when I looked at that video. And this is something that you must keep in mind. Don't let the Western media take you in the same pit that they took you with Russia when it comes to China. China is not the Satan. Yes, they make a lot of stories. The past 3-4 weeks, I have made a point of listening to video bloggers about China. And I must say, my view has completely changed, and I am pleasantly surprised. If you look at what China is doing in infrastructure in that country, China produces 6 times the steel that America produces. Americans don't know it. The American population don't know it. They think America is still the biggest thing in the world. It's not. Look at the American infrastructure. Everything is falling apart. Why don't they develop their own country? Because they don't have the money to do it. Because they spend billions of dollars in their global war systems and escapades and adventures all over the world, instead of investing in their own country. But the Chinese, they are building their country, infrastructure. In the Skidmark following this, I'm going to talk about how poverty has changed in China over the past 10-15 years. And then the people make a big story about China as a big polluter. If you go and look at the facts, the volumes of pollution reduction in China is mind-blowing. But you must never forget, that is a massive country and they have got a massive economy. So, make sure that you don't fall into the Russian trap with China, because the media lies to us and we know it. The Chinese is not the Satan. The people talk about this China with all their controls and social credit shit and so forth. And I listened to a Chinese guy, not a Chinese guy, it's a Canadian guy that's been living in China for 15 years now. And they were talking about that. And he said, no, look, yes, they've got a lot of video surveillance in their cities and lots of petty crimes. Instead of throwing the guy into jail, they will see and record the incident, and then they will put it on his record. And that will count against him when he applies for credit and things like that, and certain purchases, it will be against him. Now I want to ask you, and it is not a national thing there, it is per city and it's per region and per factory and per, it's a law, everybody. Factories have it to control their personnel and things like that. Look at the camera systems being set up in the Cape. Look at the camera systems in the CBD of Joburg. How is that different? That's surveillance. It's the same thing. But here in the West they call it surveillance, and the Chinese, they label it as part of the social credit system. So it's a lot of bullshit, that. So think about this. Think about it carefully. But if you go and you do a little bit of investigation and research, you will be amazed at what China has achieved in the past 20 years, 30 years. China builds 3 times more cars than America. The European company, the EU wants to start their economic shit now with China as well. The Chinese looks at it and they just laugh, because Just as Europe strangled themselves with the energy from Russia, they will strangle themselves when they start embargoes against and sanctions against China. And many of the big manufacturing operators in Germany is pulling out of Germany now because they can't operate. There's not energy for them. And some of them are moving to America, but the bulk is moving to China. Why? Because there's enough energy, and the Chinese has got the raw materials and everything. So I hope you will look at this and think about it, and don't see these Chinese companies that manage, if it is true that they have secured infrastructure contracts in South Africa. If you're a white guy, make sure you get in contact with those Chinese firms, because you will most probably be very surprised. Yes, the Chinese bring their own labor, most of it, because they say the average Africans are lazy and undisciplined. But in any case, I just wanted to make this skid mark so you can avoid being pulled into the same pit that they pulled us in with Russia. And on that note, hit me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. And don't call me a China lover. I'm just reporting what I see.